I've never been someone who lets people in easily. I've always been careful, the kind of person who measures every word, every smile, every secret before sharing it. But then I met someone who made me believe that maybe it was okay to lower my guard. Someone who seemed to genuinely care without any hidden motive. Their name was Jordan. They were warm, funny, and had a way of making the world feel lighter when they were around. I didn't notice it at first, but slowly I began to let them see the parts of me I usually hide. I told them little things at first, small confessions about my day, my annoyances, the kind of things that don't matter much but mean a lot when someone listens. And then, over weeks, I let them in deeper. I shared stories I never told anyone else, about moments that had left me feeling embarrassed, hurt, or lost. I trusted that what I shared would stay between us. I trusted that their attention and empathy were genuine. I trusted that the laughter and concern they offered were real and not performances. I thought I was careful, that I had measured every step, but trust has a way of sneaking in without asking. I didn't notice the signs at first. Little things, like when I asked them about something personal and they diverted the topic, or the way they sometimes joked about things I had confided in them. I wanted to ignore it, because I liked believing in people, because the idea of betrayal was unbearable. I wanted to keep trusting, to keep feeling safe. And then one day, I realized I had given them everything. My secrets, my vulnerabilities, my faith that they would protect what I had shared. And that was the exact moment everything began to unravel. It started small, almost invisible. Something I said in private slipped out in casual conversation. Something I had trusted them with was suddenly part of a rumor I didn't know existed until it reached me in a cruel, indirect way. I felt my stomach drop as I realized they hadn't just broken my trust, they had weaponized it. Every confession, every story, every piece of myself I had given to them now felt exposed. I confronted them, shaking and hurt, hoping for remorse, for some recognition that what they did was wrong. But instead, they smiled, almost arrogantly, and said, "You trusted me too much." That sentence hit harder than any lie could. In that moment, I understood a painful truth. Trusting someone doesn't make you weak, but it does make you vulnerable. And not everyone deserves your vulnerability. I walked away feeling stripped bare, my belief in people cracked, my faith in my own judgment shaken. I learned that day that trust is a gift, and giving it to the wrong person doesn't just hurt, it changes you forever.
I never thought I would be emotionally affected by a creature that once stared at a wall for 20 minutes straight, yet there I was, standing in my living room, feeling personally rejected by my own cat. His name was Milo, a gray ball of fur with an attitude that suggested he paid rent and I was merely a guest. For years we had an unspoken agreement. I fed him, cleaned his litter, and respected his personal space, and in return, he tolerated my existence and occasionally blessed me with affection. That morning, however, something was different. I woke up like any other day, stretched and instinctively reached down to pet Milo, who usually slept curled up near my feet. My hand met empty space. Confused, I sat up and found him sitting across the room, facing away from me, tail wrapped tightly around his body. I called his name softly, expecting at least an ear twitch. Nothing. He didn't look at me, didn't move, didn't acknowledge that I existed at all. At first, I laughed it off. Cats were weird. Everyone knew that. Maybe he was in one of his moods. I got out of bed, went to the kitchen, and opened his food cabinet. Normally, that sound alone summoned him like magic. This time, nothing happened. I poured his food, the same brand, same flavor, same bowl, and placed it on the floor. Milo stayed exactly where he was, staring at the wall like it had personally offended him. That's when a strange feeling settled in. This wasn't normal cat indifference. This was deliberate. This was cold shoulder behavior. I tried again, using the high-pitched voice I swore I would never use in front of other humans. I crouched down, patted the floor, and invited him over. He slowly turned his head, just enough to show me one eye, then deliberately looked away again. The message was clear. I had done something wrong. I spent the rest of the morning trying to identify my crime. Had I forgotten a treat? Changed his schedule? Looked at another cat online? The more I thought about it, the worse it felt. Milo wasn't just ignoring me. He was making a point. Every time I entered a room, he left it. Every time I sat down, he relocated to the farthest possible corner. It was like living with a tiny furry ghost who wanted me to suffer. By the afternoon, I realized something unsettling. I cared, way more than I should have. I checked his litter box, refreshed his water, even opened a new can of food as a peace offering. He ate it without looking at me, his back still turned, as if accepting the food did not mean forgiving the hand that served it. That's when it hit me. My cat had officially given me the cold shoulder, and I had no idea how to fix it. By the second day, the situation had escalated from confusing to emotionally disturbing. Milo had upgraded his behavior from passive ignoring to strategic avoidance. If I entered the room, he left. If I sat down, he relocated. If I reached out, he vanished like smoke. It felt less like living with a pet and more like being silently judged by a roommate who knew all my secrets. The worst part was that he was doing it calmly, without aggression, without noise, just pure calculated distance. I started observing him like a detective trying to solve a crime. His ears were fine, his tail wasn't puffed, his appetite was normal, and his eyes were alert. This wasn't illness, this was personal. Every small movement felt intentional, like he was proving a point. When I tried to sit next to him on the couch, he stood up, stretched slowly, and walked away without even glancing at me. That hurt more than any scratch ever could. Desperation slowly crept in. I Googled things I never thought I would type. Phrases like, why is my cat ignoring me? And what does it mean when a cat suddenly becomes distant? The internet, as expected, offered no comfort. Some articles said cats need space. Others suggested I had violated a boundary without realizing it. A few dramatic posts implied emotional betrayal, which somehow felt accurate. I scrolled endlessly, hoping for a clear answer that didn't exist. I replayed the last few days in my head, searching for the moment everything went wrong. Then I remembered it. The incident. 2 nights ago, I had moved his favorite blanket off the couch so I could sit comfortably. At the time, it seemed harmless. Now it felt like a crime against royalty. That blanket was more than fabric. It was territory. It was trust. And I had violated it without hesitation. Armed with this realization, I attempted reconciliation. I placed the blanket back exactly where it had been, smoothing it carefully like a peace treaty. I stepped back and waited. Milo approached slowly, sniffed it, sat down, and then, without acknowledging me, turned his back once again. The message was brutal. The damage had been done. As evening settled in, the house felt unusually quiet. Milo chose to sleep in the other room, something he had never done before. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the absence of his familiar presence. It was ridiculous, I knew that, but it felt like being iced out by someone you loved. That night, I realized that earning forgiveness from a cat might be harder than earning it from a human, and I wasn't sure I was ready for what that would require.
By the 5th day, the tension in the apartment had almost completely dissolved, though I was still careful not to take anything for granted. Milo moved freely again, no longer avoiding me, no longer staging dramatic exits when I entered a room. He didn't suddenly become extra affectionate, but he returned to his normal self, which somehow felt more meaningful than exaggerated attention. The cold shoulder had officially thawed. That morning, as I sat on the couch drinking coffee, Milo jumped up beside me without hesitation. He turned around twice, the universal sign of preparation, and settled directly against my leg. I waited, still cautious, until he leaned in further and pressed his head lightly into my side. That small gesture erased days of anxiety in a single moment. I reached down slowly and scratched behind his ears, and this time he didn't pull away. He purred. The sound filled the room, familiar and comforting, like everything had returned to its proper place. In that moment, I understood that the cold shoulder had never been about anger. It was about boundaries. I had unknowingly crossed one, and Milo had responded in the only way he knew how, by withdrawing. Once I respected his space and acknowledged his territory, he allowed me back in. The experience changed how I looked at our relationship. I became more attentive, more respectful, and more aware of the small routines that mattered to him. His favorite spot stayed untouched, his schedule stayed consistent, and I learned to ask with patience instead of assuming access. Looking back, it was both ridiculous and meaningful. Being ignored by my cat had taught me more about respect and trust than I expected. Milo never needed words to communicate his feelings, and when he finally forgave me, he did it quietly, on his own terms. As he slept beside me that night, warm and content, I realized that earning back a cat's trust might be one of the most humbling experiences a person can have, and I wouldn't forget that lesson anytime soon. Even after things returned to normal, I couldn't shake the awareness that something fundamental had changed between us, not in a bad way, but in a deeper, more respectful way. I found myself paying closer attention to Milo's behavior, noticing the subtle signals I had ignored before. The way his ears angled when he wanted space, the slow blink that meant trust, the quiet way he chose proximity without demanding attention. I realized that our relationship had levels I had never bothered to understand until the day I almost lost his trust. Days turned into weeks, and Milo settled back into his routines, but now they felt shared rather than assumed. When he chose to sit near me, I appreciated it instead of expecting it. When he walked away, I didn't take it personally.
That shift changed everything. Our interactions became calmer, more intentional, and oddly more affectionate than before. It was as if respecting his independence made our bond stronger instead of distant. Sometimes I caught myself smiling when he ignored me briefly, because I understood now that independence was part of who he was. He wasn't being cold, he was being a cat, and I wasn't entitled to his affection, I was invited into it. That distinction mattered more than I ever imagined. Late one evening, as Milo curled up beside me and fell asleep, I realized the cold shoulder hadn't been a rejection, it had been a lesson. It taught me patience, awareness, and respect in a way only a silent, stubborn, furry teacher could. And as I sat there listening to his steady breathing, I knew that whatever bond we had now was stronger, quieter, and more real than before.
By the 7th part of the story, I had fully accepted that Milo was not just a pet, but a personality with rules I would never completely master. What surprised me was how naturally those rules began to influence my behavior outside the apartment. I became more patient in conversations, more aware of unspoken boundaries, and less reactive when attention wasn't immediately returned. Somewhere between respecting a cat's space and earning it back, I had learned to slow down. Milo, of course, remained blissfully unaware of the personal growth he had triggered. He continued his routines with quiet confidence, choosing moments of closeness with precision. When he wanted affection, he demanded it boldly, climbing onto my lap or headbutting my hand until I responded. When he didn't, he simply existed nearby, reminding me that presence alone could be enough. That balance felt healthier than constant validation ever could. One afternoon, I realized something small but symbolic. I had sat down on the couch, leaving his blanket untouched without even thinking about it. Respect had become automatic. Milo noticed too. He hopped up, circled once, and settled beside me, his tail flicking lazily, as if approving my continued education.